Okay, this is our third lesson in Chapter 0. We're still in the 6th grade review here, and we're going to talk about comparing rational numbers. We have some very important vocab here, so make sure that you take some good notes. Our first vocab word is a rational number. So my question here says, what is a rational number? A rational number is any number that can be written as a fraction. So rational numbers can take many, many different forms. We're going to go through each of these, and if I were you, I would take some notes about this and put these down as your examples. So all fractions are rational numbers because they can be written in fraction form. So I'm just going to do a basic fraction here, 1/2. That definitely is a fraction, so it is a rational number. All mixed numbers can be written in fraction form. Let's do 4 2/3. Okay, that is a mixed number. If we want to write it as a fraction, we multiply the denominator times the whole number and add the numerator. 3 times 4 is 12, plus 2 is 14, and then we keep the same denominator. Okay, so that's 14/3. Mixed numbers are always rational. Whole numbers are always rational as well. Whole numbers can be written in fraction form by simply putting that whole number over 1. Percents are rational numbers because they can be turned into fractions as well. We're going to see that a little later today. For example, 10% can be changed into the fraction 1/10. So we will see that in a minute or two. Last but not least, a lot of people just want to jump and say that all decimals are rational. That is not true. Only 2 types of decimals are rational numbers. The first is a terminating decimal. To terminate means to end. So a terminating decimal is a decimal that ends. Okay, these are the decimals that you're typically used to seeing, like the decimal 0.25, the decimal 0.7. They can always be turned into fractions. We're going to see that later today. And this example here becomes the fraction 1/4. So a terminating decimal is a decimal that ends, it terminates. That is always rational. Repeating decimals. So let's look at the repeater 0.333. We're going to show our ellipse there at the end, ellipsis. That is a repeating decimal. A repeating decimal has a pattern that repeats itself. You may also sometimes see these written with a repeater bar over the top. Both of those mean the same thing, and they both become the fraction 1/3. We will not see this today, but we will see this in a lesson in Chapter 4, how to turn repeaters into fractions. Okay, so these are our different types of rational numbers. Pretty much everything you're used to seeing is rational. There is one number that you've seen before that is not rational, and that's this guy right here, the number pi. We will talk about that in class. And let's keep going in our notes here. Our first note says to compare or order a list of mixed rational numbers. So now that means if we have some fractions, some decimals, some percents, the first thing we have to do is to change all of the numbers to the same form. And typically that form is decimal form. I say typically. That's because fractions change to decimals very nicely. Percents change to decimals very, very nicely. So usually that's where we go. There are some exceptions, and I'll let you be the judge of when to do all fractions or all percents. Typically, we do all decimals. Let's keep going in the notes. How do we change fractions to decimals? So if we're worried about changing things into decimal form, we have to start with changing fractions into decimals, and there really is only one step here. That step is to divide. You know that fractions look like this, numerator in the top, denominator in the bottom. What we're going to do is we're just going to kind of push this guy on its side. The numerator drops into the house, and we do some quick division. Very, very easy. Let's see an example. Our example here says change 5/8 to decimal form. So I like to draw my division house right onto the denominator of my fraction, and then I just pop the 5 inside. Put my decimal after the 5, and then I bring it up into my quotient right away. 8 does not go into 5, so I add a 0. 8 does go into 50 6 times. 6 times 8 is 48, and we subtract and get 2. Bring down another 0 because 8 does not go into 2. 8 goes into 20 twice. That gets me a 16. Subtract and I get 4. Bring down one more 0. Make this guy a 40, and 8 goes into 40 5 times. Okay, so 5/8 as a decimal is 625 thousandths. Pretty easy, right? Let's keep going. So now that we know how to change a fraction to a decimal, let's talk about how to change a decimal to a fraction. 3 easy steps here. Read it, write it, reduce it. Read it means to read the number using place value. Write it means to write what you hear when you read it with place value. And reduce it means to simplify the fraction. Okay, these I call the 3 R's. Yes, I know W is not an R, but it gives that same R sound. So what I want you to do is say this to yourself about 5, 6 times. Read it, write it, reduce it. Read it, write it, reduce it. Get used to that. That is a very important set of steps, really quick brain trick to help us change decimals into fractions. Let's see an example here. Our example says to change this decimal into fraction form, and I brought out my trusty place value chart that we saw in a previous lesson. So I'm going to write this number into my place value chart to help me read it out loud. Hopefully you've been practicing this. Okay, so I cover the decimal with my finger. I read the number after it just like it's a normal whole number, 775. But since it's on the right side of the decimal, I need to read the place value of the 5 after I'm finished. So 775 thousandths. We're reading it now, 775 thousandths. Now I'm going to read it one more time, and I want you to picture what this fraction would look like. 775 thousandths. Okay, so the 775 goes in my numerator. Oops. My 1,000 goes in the denominator because I said 775 thousandths. And then we definitely want to take some time to simplify this. So I'm going to divide the numerator and denominator by 25 just to speed things up a little bit here. I know that 25 goes into 775 31 times, and 25 goes into 1,000 40 times. If you don't trust me or believe me, go ahead and check my math. Okay? So let's move on. That's how to change a decimal to a fraction. Last set of notes here. How do we convert between decimals and percents? So decimals and percents, we have this beautiful memory device, D2P. If we begin as a decimal and want to change it to a percent, we grab our decimal point, we move it 2 places to the right. Decimal to percent means we're going to the right. That 2 tells me how many times to move the decimal. If we're starting off as a percent, we grab our decimal and we move it 2 places to the left. Okay, we're always moving the decimal 2 places, always. D2P just helps us figure out which direction we're moving it. So here's our first example, change 15% to decimal form. So we're starting off as a percent, we're changing to a decimal. That means we grab our decimal point, that would be right here at the end. We're going to move it 2 places to the bloop, bloop, left. Okay, 2 places to the left, 1, 2. Put your decimal and then rewrite that number without the percent sign. And that was super fast and super easy. Second example, change 4 and 5/10 to percent form. 4 and 5/10. So I already know this number is bigger than 1 because we've got the 4 in the whole numbers place here. So I should be getting a percent bigger than 100. Let's see if that happens. We're starting off as a decimal. We're moving our decimal point 2 places to the right. 1, 2. See, I have an empty bucket here. That means I have to fill it with a 0. And then I rewrite my number. I have a 450. And I'm going to put my percent sign at the end. So that's good. We got a pretty big percent there, bigger than 100%. Okay? Easy to use D2P. The last picture note on your note packet you're going to see has a picture something like this. Please fill in the words fraction, decimal, and percent. The decimal is your easiest middleman. No matter what fraction you get, we can turn it into a decimal, and once we have a decimal, we can turn it into a percent. Same thing for percents. No matter what percent I give you, it's very easy to change it to a decimal and then read it, write it, reduce it to change it to a fraction. I do know there are shortcuts to take a fraction to a percent and a percent to a fraction, but they don't work for every single number. Okay, the way that I'm showing you is going to work every single time. So my advice is to always change your fractions to a decimal first and then D2P to make it a percent. Same thing in reverse. Change your percent to a decimal and then 3 R's to make it a fraction. All right. I do have one more example here, and we're just going to talk about it. We don't really need to solve the whole thing because we've been seeing a lot of these. Putting the numbers in ascending order, my recommendation here would be to change everything to decimals. Okay, so my first number is already a decimal, negative 2.055. That's negative 2 and 55 thousandths. Negative 2 and 1/2 becomes negative 2 and 5/10. 2/5 becomes 4/10. 25% becomes 0.25 or 25 hundredths. And 2 and 5/10 is already in decimal form. So these numbers are pretty quick and pretty easy. We can just finish it up here to put into ascending order. Ascending means least to greatest, so we're going to start with our smallest number, which is this guy right here. If we add our zeros at the end, we'll see that 500 looks to be bigger than 55, but that means, you know, for negatives, it's farther away from 0, so it's actually our smallest number. That's negative 2 and 1/2. Our other negative is negative 2 and 55 thousandths. Then we go to our positive numbers, adding my zeros here so I can compare them. 0.25 is my smallest, that's 25%. 0.4 or 0.40 is next, that's 2/5. And 2 and 50 hundredths is our largest. And we'll write them all in their original form. Okay, I know we went through that quickly, but all we did was just do some division to change those into decimals. Okay, great job today. Rewatch anything that you need to watch. I'll see you tomorrow.